Jean Rollin would have turned 89 today had he lived. I find it really sad and frustrating that his movies have been slipping into obscurity over these past few years. There are occasional releases of his movies in different territories, and they do get talked about, but not nearly enough. Some of his more famous movies include The Living Dead Girl, Grapes of Death, Fascination, Lips of Blood. He's made a number of vampire films. Jean Rollin belongs to this fantastique tradition of cinema, and his way towards achieving his creative goals has been immensely hard. For every movie that he managed to make, there were like 2 or 3 failed projects, and each movie that he managed to complete he had to compensate for by directing like a dozen pornographic movies. His situation was that his movies during his lifetime weren't making profit. His genre movies, the films he was really passionate about, were either failures at the box office or he would get ripped off by the distributor. So Jean Rollin had a hard time living off his art, so he had to complement his earnings by working as an adult filmmaker, and he's made dozens of erotic and sex movies under a pseudonym. He frequently worked with Brigitte Lahaie, who's also this adult actor who transitioned later to become a TV personality and a well-known media presence in France. Jean Rollin, when he got progressively older and started developing health problems, he had trouble getting financing for his new film projects, so he switched to writing novels, short novellas and novels, which got published mainly in France in those kind of softcover editions. And a number of his projects, which would have been films, ended up as these little books. My personal Jean Rollin films include Night of the Hunted, which I think is his most emotionally moving movie, and I love Grapes of Death, which is really action-packed. And Lips of Blood is another one I have a place in my heart. And not to forget Zombie Lake, which Jean Rollin just made for the money and didn't give a crap about, but I enjoy Zombie Lake for various reasons. I've got a couple of his movies here, and some more dedicated Jean Rollin fans have been collecting these media books, which usually include trailers and some interview materials and a lot of stills, and occasionally also some alternative re-edits for the German market with some German titles or inserts. I think the cool thing about Jean Rollin is how he uses real locations, how he manages to convey his kind of eerie atmosphere by going to a real place and framing shots in a certain way. He was famous for filming in crypts, inside old cemeteries, castles, and by the seaside, by this famous very cold and uncanny looking beach with those pylons, wooden pylons sticking out the water, which you can see in almost every film of his, including The Iron Rose and Demoniacs and Lips of Blood and so on. And towards the end of the 80s and early 90s, Jean Rollin was more or less retired. He had real difficulty getting his own projects off the ground, and the 90s were the time when he was very much obscure, when suddenly some of his films started resurfacing on cable TV. Then he sold home video rights. Eventually Salvation in Britain started bringing out his movies, which contributed to his growing renown. And then there was a brief period when he returned to cinema with a couple of well-received but relatively obscure films, such as The Night of the Clocks, for example, or Dracula's Fiancé, movies like that. And his final movie was, I think, Medusa, which I still haven't seen. I'd like to watch that. So I'm hoping to fit in another Jean Rollin review later on this week. Thanks a lot for watching, and go and check out some Jean Rollin movies. Have a nice day.